Hi, my name's Philip Bither. I'm curator for performing arts at the Walker Arts Center. And with me is Trajal Harrell, who is US premiering his work, The Ghost of Montpellier Meets the Samurai. I really should say The Ghost of Montpellier Meets the Samurai. And we are so pleased and excited to be a commissioner of this work, and welcome.
Thank you.
And great to have you back here to the Walker.
It's great to be back here.
How are you feeling a few days before this?
It's good. It's
Yeah.
good. It's really nice to be. I'm very excited because I like the audiences here, and I remember last time just how surprising it was to me to find this very astute and connected and very vibrant audience in Minneapolis, because I'm someone who's afraid for the cold, so I wasn't expecting that, you know.
Well, and we also have 65-degree weather for you
I
here
know.
in February,
I know.
early March. So
I know.
Well, you know, I wanted to start not so much about the work, but your newest piece, but just your work in general. And you have this ability to combine the cerebral with the whimsical in a way that I haven't seen very often. And I wonder if these elements that most people think of, playfulness and intellect, as sometimes contradictory, has this always been a part of elements that you put together in your work?
No, I think part of it, it's a funny thing, I think part of it is age. You know what I mean? Like I think that my work started, of course, when I was a very young artist, I think my work started in this kind of minimalist, very dry, you know, formalist, kind of looking at Judson, trying to find a way. And I think that, of course, part of that might have been that I did this research in voguing, and so the voguing tradition, and I kind of did a kind of comparative, theoretical mixing of those two things. And of course, the
over
voguing,
the 7-part or 8.
Well, there's the series, which is 8 parts. But actually, that research started in 1999. So that was from 1999 to 2013. So that was like a 14, 15-year research. So I think that within itself gave the work another kind of feeling. But I do think there's something about maturing as an artist that you loosen up some, and what you want to bring to people changes. And I think that, you know, I think that there's something about, there was a certain point in the work also when I began to look at the idea of entertainment and how entertainment could, because I'd made a lot of work which had really kind of been looking at this kind of conceptual debate in dance. And then I wanted to kind of bring attention to that, and part of that was looking at entertainment, because a lot of people feel or think that entertainment is antithetical to art.
It's a word that sometimes we get charged with. We don't even use. You know,
we can't. We're not supposed to use it. And the research I started to do, and I think even Walker did a show, because one of the books that I did research on, exhibition, was this book that was based on a show here. And you begin to see that this is not true, that the idea of entertainment and art going together, not going together was certainly a modernist concept, but this idea they go together, I mean, certainly in Shakespeare's time, certainly in the ancient Greek theater, and all of those things kind of gave me, I think, the inspiration to go further and to feel that folly and joy and all of those things were things that I also wanted to explore in the work, and that made the work more fascinating because there was a conceptual or formalist root and foundation underneath. So I think part of it is, you know, also been very strategic in a certain type of way, because I did want to enlarge the audience of my work, and I felt that conceptualism had kind of run its course in dance, and I wanted to continually find a way to, of course, have, now I'm saying a lot of things, sorry, but I think that, you know, dance fought a long time to be a kind of thinking project,
right, and
for the thinking body to be present. But I think it had reached a point where, like, we were thinking so much that we weren't moving, and that was important, but then the moving was also important. So how to start moving again, how to get those engines going again. And so a lot of those questions were very important to me about entertainment and joy and fun and relaxing and all the other things that can happen in the theater. Besides, yes, there has to be this great theoretical thing happening too, but I wanted something else in my work.
So I hadn't heard you say it quite the same way. So really the cycle, 20 looks, Paris is Burning, at the Judson Church?
20 Looks for Paris is born at the Judson Church, yes.
Really, you take Yvonne, manifesto, Yvonne Rainier's manifesto that sort of was the formation of Judson, which was no to spectacle and no, really, she didn't say these words, but no to entertainment. And you juxtaposed it with the voguing scene in Harlem. So you really, it was very upfront and conscious, like, let's put these two things together.
I mean, it was a conscious decision. I mean, the conscious idea was, I mean, I think like many artists at that time, and we were trying to, Judson had been revised, let's say, revitalized, rediscovered, particularly in France by the French conceptualists, but also at a certain point in the U.S. Baryshnikov did his Pass Forward project, which was a big sign for a lot of people. And I think that we were kind of stuck because there was a sense of that how can we get past this? Like those rules, that, like Yvonne's No Manifesto, had become a kind of set of tenets for making dance in a certain contemporary scene, and I felt that it was too reductive for where we were at that moment in history. And I felt that although these were, I was certainly from that legacy, I felt that I couldn't just repeat what my mothers and fathers had done. As Steve Paxton said, why haven't you all rebelled? I mean, Steve asked that question. And I felt that I had to rebel. And so when I discovered the voguing dance tradition, I felt that by looking at those two things, because they were historically analogous, they were happening at the same time, that all of those things that Yvonne said no to, I could say maybe to. Maybe to spectacle, maybe to being moved, maybe to glamour. And so I think that's the kind of place where the work began to revolve around, where all these maybes. And of course, you spoke about the series, as the series developed in the different sizes, Mimosa, which was the one which came here, Mimosa was the piece in which I decided, okay, what happens if we bring entertainment into this? How does it change things? And I found that, okay, people were ready for that. They were ready for all of that alterity, that history, and that entertainment. It could work. And then, of course, the next part I did had to do with dealing with Greek drama and Greek tragedy. So then you add that into the mix. So it was always this way of like being a bit of a, I don't know if scientist is the quite word, but working with different aesthetic properties and questionings and strategies. But yeah, I said maybe to all those things that Yvonne said. And to some degree, I wanted to be critical. I mean, not be critical of Yvonne, because Yvonne is critical of Yvonne. And if you talk to Yvonne, Yvonne says, no, this No Manifesto has nothing to do with what I'm doing today, you know? And she didn't expect that people would, I mean, but we can separate that text from Yvonne as a person. It is a text that was very useful. But I think I wanted to be critical of this kind of stance, that how people were framing Judson, because they were really framing it in a way of like this sense of neutrality. And of course, we had also come through the kind of multicultural wars of the 90s. And for me, Judson was this idea that somehow that Judson had created a neutral aesthetic that was completely without social or racial or sexual inscriptions was not possible. Of course, all of those things were socially inscribed as well. And so I felt that I needed to problematize my own position within that. And so it was part of a strong kind of critical analysis, but trying to find, a place for myself and to build a space for my work without knowing perhaps what that could be. I think that's what the conundrum always is for an artist, when you feel that, okay, there's not a space for my work, but I don't quite know what my work is, so you're building the space for your work at the same time that you're building the work. And that's what's quite tricky. And so it was a shot in the dark in a lot of ways, and the fact that it kind of landed and had an impact was as much a surprise for me as it was for anyone, really.
I guess things in some ways come in ebbs and flows. I think it was on this stage in a conversation with Bill T. Jones about his 80s work, when he said, when he made Secret Pastures that had Huck Snyder and, sort of popish music by Peter Gordon and things, that he caught a lot of grief from the postmodernists who said, what are you doing with all this colorful, and that question of entertainment versus serious art seemed to be present at that moment as well. Do you find that your exploration of history seems to be this another node. I mean, you really seems to you go back and you do study and do rigorous investigation of not just dance history, but cultural history, and then juxtapose elements that maybe never lived in the same temporal moment. Is that always been a part of your interest? And
well,
did you study were you partially a historian in your school years?
I mean, if I look now at the history of what happened to me, I was an American Studies major in college, so I did look at cultural studies, of course, and feminist studies and art history and theater studies. But when this 20 Looks project really was a kind of was kind of a watershed project for me, in that I think I came back to a mode of working that came from high school and junior high school. Because when I was in junior high school and high school, I don't know if, I'm sure it happens in Minnesota as well, but there is, in the United States, we have something called National History Day competition.
Oh yeah, it's big here.
Is it big here? And in Georgia, I started in 7th grade, I started doing group performance, and I would get a couple of students together and we'd make a performance and we'd go to competition on these History Day topics.
Rather than a poster board with a graph
exactly.
and
I didn't do project, I didn't do essay, I did group performance. And we won state, first place 6 years in a row.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Was your performance anything like it is today? Or?
No, but in a way, but that's what I mean. That when I look back at it, like, History Day always, the themes were always these kind of contradictory elements, like conflicts and compromises.
Right.
And so I would look at like American slavery, like conflicts and compromise, and make some kind of, it's very funny, I made a TV show about slavery, conflicts and compromise. So if you've seen Ghost, you'll go like, okay. So it took me a while to realize that that's a real formation. 6 years of junior high school and high school making performances based on history around contradictory ideas in history. Like, of course, that must have been in me. And then when I got to this Judson thing and I came up with this historical proposition, I mean, it had to come from there on some. I wasn't aware of it. It took me a while when I started to get deeper into that work, and then when I started making other work, and this whole way of working seemed to me to be quite possible as a way of working. Like I felt like, okay, that's the way I want to work right now. I didn't see the need to change. It felt, like I've been working that way for a while. And I think that but I think it's weird for a lot of people, because I think it's important to say that the way I do work differently than I worked, say, in junior high in high school, in that I don't try to recreate history the way it was, or factually. And even the work which I'm doing now, some of the work I'm doing on archive, people have been quite fascinated, because I don't I also go to in the archive to know what I shouldn't look at and to stay away from things, because I feel that the most important thing to me is that I'm working in the imagination. So history for me is a way to enliven the imagination. And of course, I think one of the most important things that probably had a big impact on me is that I think it was 2009, I heard Tanya Bruguera speak, and she was speaking about impossibilities. And I really connected with what she was saying in terms of like her own work, but just like the artist's role. And I feel that those historical propositions, whether it be Judson coming together with voguing or whatever it is, they're like impossibilities. And they create a space in the theater, which I feel like that's where the theater can be, where together we can kind of vibe on this impossibility, and it allows us to have a kind of imaginative field of experience. And I think it's the practicing of that field of experience that enlivens our world, because I think that there's so many things that we have to believe are possible, that we think are impossible, that we still have to have the guts and the belief and the tenacity to go after. And I think that's what an artist's job can be, is to give people that, and to give them the sense of how they can use the imagination, and to believe that yes, the impossible is possible. And we know history. I mean, we know enough about the past to know that comes in handy. It really comes in handy. And I think that
about imagining a new future going forward.
Exactly.
Do you feel like dance and contemporary dance and performance offers a sort of form that allows that kind of imaginary or imaginative reframing of history to happen easier than, say, other art forms? Because the theater tends to be a bit more narrative and literal, or even literary arts or things.
No, I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I work in dance, so I don't know, but I know what I try to do, and I know that it's very difficult, but I know that when it works, it's very strong, and I don't know of other mediums, and that is the sense of togetherness that you can have in the theater.
The collective experience.
Yeah, this sense of being together. It's like a kind of how can I say, like, we don't name it. That's the thing. It's not like we name what the imaginary thing that we're all vibing on is, but we all sort of get on the same page and we're riding a wave together. And it's the belief that we're together that holds us together. And of course, that belief is just imaginary. It's just something we hold in the moments that we're in the theater. But that, to me, is the great beauty and wonder of what theater can be, and that's, I say this often, Martha Graham said before theater was a noun, it was a verb. And it's that when you can get into that, the gerund of theater, the actual verb, is when something it's actually, we all know those moments. And we all know that we don't have them all the time. But they're so powerful that we continue to go back, even if they're not so good, because we know that it's possible that we can have that experience, And I think I was recently somewhere, someone said, I think I said that there was a Japanese I can't remember if it was or Kabuki master, who said the purpose of theater was to see each other's faces. And I thought, wait, was it see? It was to look upon. There was something about the faces. Excuse me, I don't have the quote right, but it wasn't just it was an active way in which we recognize each other in the theater, and that recognition becomes a way to enliven our sense of our experience in life, and to reconnect us to life, and to believe that this journey that we're all on is somehow worth it, and to get up the next morning. And I feel like that's the basis of what I do. That's when you strip it all back. That's what it's about on some level.
But you've raised such interesting questions, especially ones that we're grappling with here at the Walker at this moment in time. But before I get there, I want to just ask, so in many ways, do you see your career as just honing that ability to create that collective energy and magic, like to how to shape work so those moments that we all hang on to for a long time after we leave the theater are able to be achieved in some way?
Yeah, and I think that you try to get better at speaking about more important things. Deeper things, because it's very hard. It's easy. It's really easy to do some things and to get people to ha on certain things, and to leave to feel like, oh, we had a good time, we spent our time.
Yeah.
But I think the older you get, the more you want to be able to really go into places that you don't know how to do, but you feel that are very important, and to get people to imagine, I don't know how to explain it, because it's something, but I know Ghost was one of those things that I tried to do something I really didn't know how to do, if I knew how to have the craft to do, and I really wanted to do. And I think that now I go, oh, okay, I can do that now. Now where can I go? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not easy. I'm gonna use an example here, and it's not my example, but I'm gonna say, we all know war is bad.
Right.
Okay. This is not new, but when like Picasso's Guernica, to get people in a very moment in history to really understand the impact and to make changes, because art can do that. And I think that takes a lot of craft, and so that's what you get better at, is honing in on where you are in your particular moment in history, what your limitations are, and what it is that you need to say in your moment in time that you can only you can say, because only you see that.
Right.
So I mentioned that thing about Picasso because maybe, that was what at that moment he needed to make that work, then to speak about war, and it was a very important time. And I don't know what mine will be, but I just know that I feel that the togetherness is important, and then it's about, okay, but now what?
Yeah.
Now what is it? Now what are you really going to say? And I think that's the thing, is you get more opportunities, you need to use them for something, you know?
So it sounds like you're saying it's like you may have gained those skills to be able to create a collective experience earlier on in your career, but now it's the question of what should you use it for? What's the content that you most want to convey? You know, in the art world, you're a choreographer and a performance maker who's spent a lot of time in both the stage world of performing arts and dance festivals and things, as well as in the museum world, and you have knowledge of those practices. When you talk about the essential nature of the collective experience, it sounds like then you would put yourself on the side of Peggy Phelan, for instance, around that live performance is not necessarily something that it can be documented, that can be captured, that can be acquired, can be in a collection of a museum necessarily, because how do you capture those 300 people together in one room experiencing something? Or
well, I don't know about the documentation. I have a hard time around that. I think that the documentation is very difficult, and I think the documentation can't do it.
No matter how many cameras, no matter whether it's 3D or whatever else, or
I think you make something else. I think cinema is a total different kind of experience that is just as interesting and important and does something differently.
Yeah.
It's not my specialty, so I can't talk about it as much. But I do think that, you know, the experience in the visual arts setting, whether we can talk about live performance in the visual arts setting, is another conundrum, because of course the togetherness or this collective experience that operates on a kind of different mobility is very challenging on another level. And I've just been working on a piece that deals with that, and it's
for your residency at MoMA.
No. This will be a piece. I can't. This piece deals with half of the piece is visual art performance and half of the piece is dance performance. On one side, there's a set in the middle, and so the audience operates between the two. And it's interesting to see, because I didn't know how it would work. I just knew that I wanted to see what would happen if, because it's going back to the residency at MoMA. The residency at MoMA, what I was working on is to try to see how the theater work can influence the gallery work, how the gallery work could, so to create the circle of influence.
Sure.
And so then I made this piece, which won't be at MoMA, in fact, but will be at some museums. And so I wanted to make a piece for museums and a piece that could be in museums and a piece that could be at theaters. So that's why I did this bifurcated wall. But then to see how the audience, what would it take for them to move between the two, and could that movement create this kind of collective togetherness? And we did it in Hamburg. We had the vamp premiere in Hamburg, and it did, and it worked like clockwork.
Did the side where the audience was seeing more of an installation kind of side of things, did they have the freedom to come and go and wander? And then when they saw the theatrical side, they had to sit down and focus in, or?
Well, you start off, everyone starts off on the theater side, the dance performance side, and then at a certain moment you know that the other side, the visual art performance side, is open and you can go, and then from then on you can go back and forth. But what's interesting was to see how they collectively come together with the dramaturgy of the piece. So they go and they come back, and then at certain points more people come back, a few people stay, and by the end everyone comes back. And it was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Everyone comes back to the theater?
Yeah, you've got to be. But it was, they did exactly what I expected them to do. But the funny thing about it is it's clockwork. But the thing is, Philip, I have to tell you what I realized about that, because it was really I was shocked, because we were like, nobody's going to go back. We were so worried this is not going to work. But the majority of people who go to theater also go to museums. The majority of people who go to museums also go to theater. So if you give them the clues, they know how to do it. It's not something that they don't know how to do. So it was just a matter of choreographing temporally, giving them the clues, and then they just do it. It's not so difficult. It's much easier than I thought it would be. So much easier. And it's just a matter of setting up the clues very easily. And
some argue that in this era, when attention spans might be shorter, or there's more of a sort of desire for the kind of freedom to make your own choice as to how you experience art, that people would gravitate toward that free flow side and not necessarily the somewhat more restricted side of being collective and together, but you didn't find that to be the case
Well,
at all.
I think what I found from this, what I'm saying actually is the whole thing was collective and together. Is that there's a feeling that like we're doing this thing together, because you see people. The real choreography is not this. I mean, there's a lot going on that we perform, but the real choreography is the action of the audience, and you're aware. You're completely. It's very clear when people start coming back, everyone starts going. The first time everyone starts going, and then people recognize, okay, now everyone's they see something special happening, and most of them come back. Not all of them. It's a feeling in the room. You feel it in the room, and so they get the feeling, and you see them get the feeling, and you see other people get the feeling. So it's really remarkable. I mean, you will see this piece, of course, because
I'm dying to
it will start.
It seems like it's a case study on a lot of the questions that we're asking in the art world and performance world. What if you had done that piece, let's say in a Walker gallery, where people kind of ebb and flow? Sometimes there's very few people. You don't announce any time whatsoever. Half of it is set up with some bleachers or for a performance. Do you think it still would have worked if without anyone being told even when to come or what to do, you know?
No. I don't think so. I think that we will do the museum. We will do a museum version. We've not done the museum version yet. The version we did in Hamburg was a theater version.
Right. Yeah.
We will do the museum version. It will be performed in 2017 and at other museums and places, you know. But
in New York.
It will be performed in 2017 in New York, but it's getting ready to I can't say where it's premiering because
that's okay.
because it's the official announcement is in March. And but it will go places like the Barbican and different places but
they'd have both galleries and theaters.
Well, even the Barbican, it will be in the gallery. It will be the museum version. But in the museum version, what we would, the big thing we will do is that they will announce the time that it will start.
Sure.
But of course, the mobility issue will be different because I will not situate it in a kind of like 8 p.m. situation. It could be in the middle of the day, let's say, for example. So yes, you could have 3 people watching, nobody watching on the other side. Yeah, all of those things, it's going to change. And that I can't speak to yet because we haven't done it yet. But I think that I'm interested to see how this collectivity of bringing something which is like an objective dance object in a way into the museum, how it gathers a certain type of force as well. I think it will be different, of course, than the theater, but I don't know that it will be so different I think it will be different in numbers as you bring out, because there will be certain times that won't have this kind of collective people coming together. But I don't know that it will be so different in that those people who start, I think more people will come in at different times. And I think that then, because what we would do in the museums that we will not do in the theater, is that we will show it more than one time a day. So then people will get to come back and see things.
Word will trickle out and like, I got to go back and see. You know, one other practice in the museum field and performing arts to a lesser extent around archiving, I wanted to ask, as you have researched your work in recent years by going into archives, for instance, the new work, The Ghost, going into Hijikata's archives or doing historical research, has that changed how you think about how you want to archive your own work and what some young choreographer 30 years from now might want to do with your work based on what you've archived or not?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, I think, that the question you were bringing up, Peggy, about like museums collecting, because this has become a question I've had to start thinking about what happens to my work when I die. And there are many issues around this question. And one of the issues has to do with like, well, I don't really want to build an institution that has to save it. And I actually do want some of it to be saved. And I think that if museums can be part of that project and can help preserve some of the work, I'm all about it. I'm all for it. And if there can be an economy that can help me in my retirement and help me, I'm all for that. But I do think that I've been thinking about my archives, and I've actually already started talking to one university about keeping them. I mean, I think I want it to be very personal. I want to be involved in it. I mean, I think that at first I was like, okay, you know, this thing of, well, how do you know, I think for a while it was very cool in the dance field to be like, oh, I don't care what happens to my work.
I just want to make the next piece.
I just want to make the next piece. I don't want any of it to be saved, you know. This was kind of the ethos that was going around. And then someone just sat me down and said, listen, you know, if you're gonna, this is your legacy whether you want it or not.
Right.
So even if that's fine, if that's your choice, but that is your legacy, and what are the meanings around that?
Right.
So if that's what you do, then recognize that there are certain meanings that are going to be produced around that.
Yeah.
What meanings do you want to be produced? And so
Right.
I realized that, I want it to be very personal. So even if I give my archives to a university, I'm already thinking about, like, of course, I have to. It is a certain performance. It is a certain kind of performativity. Of course, like whether you write on, do everything by computer or you do everything by hand.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
All of those things.
Yeah.
So I am thinking about it. I don't have any answers, but I want people to know that it was not just something that was instrumentalized through
or
an
that
institution.
someone else made these choices for you.
Yeah, exactly. That I made those choices.
But it sounds like in the way you think about museum collecting process, it's not so much, it's more of a preservation than it is to create objects of art world value in the marketplace kind of thing, or is it a bit of both?
I don't know. I'm answering that question right now.
Yeah,
I think that it's a bit of both, because I'm certainly not going to give it to them for free.
Sure, right.
So I have to recognize that it's going into a market, and I often say, I said so much funny that, it's like I think of myself as the Billie Jean King. You know what I mean? I'm not the Serena Williams. So I think, Philip, we have to know that 30 years down the road, 40, 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road, that there's going to be a lot of performance in markets. I know my friends.
Yeah.
I talk to friends of mine who are selling dance performance to in galleries, who are selling it to collectors, selling it to museums now.
Right.
So of course it's going to happen. Of course
sure.
it's going to happen. And so you can either again, it's about, like, where are you in your point in history? It's totally fine not to enter into that.
Yep.
No problem. But I think that I will, because I want not all of my work, but some of it to be saved. And I know that it will be different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I have to figure out what type of mechanisms to reproduce this thing, and maybe I would like that the things that reproduce, in the same way that I work on the work today, the mechanisms they produce something. They don't just try to recreate the thing that I made.
Right.
That's
it becomes a different thing then too. And and some of the things I've been in these conversations in the field about, I also feel that if functionally the market can help sustain a dysfunctional system of American dance touring, then why not allow one market to support the creation of new work in another? I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this on tape, but,
no, it's okay.
it does. These are art forms that are merging together, and artists are crossing boundaries all the time. So it seems like the ways the economies of the two forms, dance and visual art, work are blurring as well. But.
And I think that you're in an institution which, so it's very exciting, because you have a theater and you're connected to a visual art space, and you're part of the same thing. So this is a perfect place for that kind of conversation. I do think that there are people who make work that may not be easy to split between those two things.
Right.
And I think that part of what happened, and maybe Judson is a part of this, is that also there was a point at which this kind of modern dance company model of people making big work no longer became feasible for a lot of artists.
Yeah.
And so not only were they making smaller work, but they were making a different kind of work, and that work has an affinity with some of the performance work and some of the stuff that was going on in the visual art world. So it makes sense in a way. So I think some of my pieces, even though someone told me that's not true, like I was thinking I don't know. Like,
what do you mean that's not true?
Because I was thinking, for example, I was really, because thinking about this, how to place my work, and there are some pieces, like, say, from the series, like Small, that make complete sense. Like, they could be in a museum's collection, blah, 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 blah. It's a solo, it has a score, blah, blah. And I was like, but Antigone Senior, no one is going to collect that. Yeah. Like, why would they collect? And someone said to me, I don't know if that's true, because the reality is that they have theaters, and if you can prove again that how this is managed? Maybe. Who knows? That's a matter of, you don't know. If someone wants it, they want it. Would you not? She said, and this friend of mine said, the question is, would you sell it to them? The question is not, would they not buy it? The question is, so I don't know. It's such the Wild West right now. It's so exciting in a way. And like, I was so sad that I missed the conference that you had.
Yeah.
I think it's just an exciting time, because I think that we know what's going on.
Right.
And we're here living in it right now, and the questions and the answers are not here. The models are not here.
People are making up things and trying it out and seeing if it might work, and it's a very exciting time. And I think when you ask the question of, if someone wants to buy it, I think then it comes to the next question. If it's Antigone Senior, what kind of parameters will you set up so that in the purchase process, it always has to be done the way you had imagined, or something like that. Right.
And I think that, I think that what's important, because when these conversations started in the beginning, I think there was a lot of fear from the theater side that somehow museums were going to take over the dance field or theater,
Yeah.
I think that that's not true, but I do think it's important that from the theater perspective or the part of perspective that's not in the museum, that we stay in the conversations, that that we not give, and I think, and I want to say this very clearly because I think it's very important. We know that the visual art field has a strong instrumentation for creating critical language and critical history and history. And so we know that on the dance side, at least, and I won't speak for theater, that there's a really weak instrumentation of that.
Yeah.
And so if we don't want our history to be written by people in the visual art field, that doesn't mean that we just have to be critical of that apparatus.
Sure.
That means that we have to foster and nurture and say that it's very important, that how we have to think about the importance of writing our history again.
Yeah.
And I think that it shows a weakness that we haven't been paying attention to, and I think that that's very important. That because I think it is very important that I think there's just real differences. Very real differences, and I don't think those differences are going to fall away, nor should they fall away, but they're certainly not going to fall away in the next 50 years. And so I think it's very important that we stay
between live performance, dance, and visual art. And Do you think that partly the reason that dance has not been better about theoretical history and telling its own story is because it is a non-verbal form often, and that words and text have not been the tools by which the art form itself is created? Yeah, and I mean, I think that's part of it, but I think there's that part of it is that that it's very difficult to write about dance. Yeah.
You have to be there. It's the kind of objecthoodness that happened in the visual arts happened around a certain way of looking at things, and there haven't been huge. I mean, we also have to talk about like the education system.
Right.
I mean, the number of art history departments versus dance departments and dance history departments. I mean, all of that is just we're just catching up in a lot of ways. I mean, the idea of a dance field is relatively new compared to the idea of a art field. And of course, the value has a lot to do with that. I mean, of course, this idea that Louis XIV made the ballet d'école, I mean, but he of course, he was not thinking, oh, okay, but the ballet has a very specific history, and it has a very specific kind of regime that takes care of that. So I think what we're talking about here is really this contemporary dance field in a lot of ways, which began in like, the 20s, 1920s, so isn't even 100 years old, versus like the contemporary art field, which is much more aligned with the whole history of art. So we have thousands of years to catch up with, so it's going to take a long time, but it is going to take, I think, a kind of renewed commitment. I feel, and I keep saying that when I get into these conversations with people, well, it's on us. It's not, we can't just complain and say that whatever, like you have to feel that it's important. But it's funny working a lot in Europe, because in France we can speak of, which is, choreography is really seen as a writing. It's like the way like the way they choreographique, this way this word is really seen as a kind of writing. And this sense is also changes the way they think about reading dance.
Oh.
And I find this also limiting in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? So I say that because you can never get it right, right? Art, I mean, the beauty of art is that it will always beautifully, I think, like water slip through our fingers. We can never hold it, you know what I mean? It just, you know, it just desires all of us to come into being and to come more and more people to come into the conversation. So I don't have answers for it, and I think that it probably won't look the way we think it's going to look.
Right,
you know?
right. Do you see a role for institutions and for curators in addition to artists themselves in helping model that, get that language down?
Oh yeah, I think it's important that this, I mean, this field of, you know, I don't know, I mean, you've been working with Wesleyan in this kind of curatorial institute. I think it's very important, and I think that this kind of, someone wrote a book, I can't remember, is it Kalaki? The
John?
guy?
Yeah, who used to have my job here.
He wrote a book on presenting versus programming versus curating or something in this book. It's a very nice book. And I think that now that more and more dance people are thinking of themselves as curators, I think is a good addition to it. It's good. I don't think everyone should be a curator, and everyone should not think their work is curating. And the more we specify what that is, but I do think that part is very important. I think that part has been very important in the visual arts, that you not just have, you know, museum and institutions and critics and collectors, but there's also these curatorial people who are there working to think about what is important and how to shape this conversation. And the critics are very important. That's another, it's another very, and often, of course, the curators and the critics overlap. But I think in everywhere, I think this is everywhere I go. I don't think it's just a United States problem. But criticism in dance tends to be journalistic. There's not a lot of critical work around the art form that's not just written in papers. So the curators help build that body of work, and so I think the more curators we have working in dance, the more, you know, critical writing we'll have in dance. It's not limited to, you know, like a review in a newspaper.
Yeah. Could we talk for a second about, I know we're shifting gears to the new work that we're going to all get to see.
Yeah, we should talk about that,
The Ghost. Tell me, I mean, you bring these figures, Dominique Baguet of Nouvelle Danse in the 80s in France, and Hijikata, co-founder of Buto Dance in Japan, and then an impresario who's bigger than life, like Ellen Stewart, who founded and directed La Mama. What were you first thinking in bringing these figures together, and what are the general themes, or what do you hope people will get from it, especially those who might not know any of these figures?
Well, this is a multi-part question.
Yes, sorry.
Well, they didn't come together all at once. First of all, the first impetus was there had been a kind of idea for me to do a piece on Dominique Baguet in France, and there had been as many people might not know, that many of the French choreographers, many of them from this conceptual generation, had done a lot of reconstruction of American dance pieces. Continuous Project Daily by Yvonne Rainer, Anna Halpern's piece. I think someone even reconstructed Steve Paxton, but there had been some reconstruction. So there had been this sense that the French artists had kind of looked into the American dance history. And here I was being given and Dominique Baguet is very big within a certain milieu in France. 80s French Nouvelle Danse, and he died in 1992 of AIDS. So he had his ghost is big in France and super big in Montpellier, where I was invited to make this piece. And so I started.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it was a lot. It got even worse. I mean, I could not have asked for more, but I love it. I mean, you know, my big thing you hear me talk about is I'm a big tennis fan. I love tennis, you know, and I often the Williams sisters, you know, and other people too. But you know, you have to. If you don't like pressure, don't play. You know what I mean? So I have to like the pressure. But I realized at a certain point that it was way too heavy for what I wanted to do Dominique Baguet
Right.
in Montpellier, in L'Agora, the theater he made.
Right.
I realized, I was like, okay, it needs some, but that's my thing. I knew it needed some type of foil because
Right.
Judson, Vogue, I knew there was something that was needed. And I was already involved in a research on Tatsumi Hijikata, and finally I just realized, oh, well, this makes total sense. Like, why can't I do them together? Like, why do I have to see this project as separate from this research I'm already in? So then I put them together, and I'm trying to think what the second part of what I hope people should get.
Did you see perhaps Ellen Stewart as the kind of person who might have, if they lived in the same city at the same time, had brought them together to make a work together or something?
Well,
like that?
I had certain, I don't want to be a spoiler because it's very important, Ellen's role in this and where she brings them together and how they come together. But do we spoil here? We
no,
don't.
it won't go up until after the show.
Okay. So very good. So I always had to problematize my own position in these situations, and I felt that this piece was always very important to me that it be seen in the United States. And
why?
I'm from here, and I also think that one of the things that I was really interested in was like how we write history, and how we write history from a very limited, dance history particularly from a very limited point of view, that we don't know anything about Dominique Baguet.
Right,
we know a little bit about, when we write the history of dance, we speak about, and I'm not talking about ballet, ballet is a certain history, but we speak about the American moderns, we speak a little bit about the Germans, and maybe we'll speak a little bit about a few things that happen in England. But we don't really know a lot about anything that goes on in France or anywhere. Or
maybe Maggie Marat or someone.
Maybe.
Yes, right.
And I felt that was very interesting, like how, but at the same time, here I was entering into, I didn't want to establish another paradigmatic history.
Right.
Of course, this isn't my thing, so I wanted history to be something that was questioning itself. And I also felt that if I was to do that, I had to kind of somehow place myself within that and problematize, how am I looking at these things?
Right.
And Dominique, of course, died of AIDS, and the specter of that is huge.
Right.
And how that is integrated into a kind of history, his history in France, is also very complicated. And so, and there are a lot of things about Hijikata, which are also, but then I began to realize that what was most interesting to me, okay, I could speculate on all of those things, but what was most interesting was the fact that they died really before their work, before, you can imagine that they had a lot more work to do.
How old was Hijikata when he died?
50 some, late 50s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and he spawned a whole movement of dance.
Yeah.
And Dominique Baguet, they were both people who had larger visions. They were not just people who made work. They were people who had larger visions. And if they had been in other fields of experience or other disciplines, perhaps we would know them in a certain type of way, because we would have this kind of like, they died too young. It's like what happened, Michael Jackson, Kurt Cobain, or Amy Winehouse, this type of thing that we get involved in.
Sure.
And I thought that, but I also thought that each of them brought something very special about their commitment to life and their commitment to dance, and a kind of celebration of dance, but from such different, amazing viewpoints that would never come into a kind of not only American dance history, but a kind of American cultural experience. And in some ways, even a French cultural experience, because a lot of people, let's not mistake, a lot of people in France do not know who Dominique Baguet is. And so I think that Ellen, I want to bring someone in who was, they're all kind of a foil for me, but I wanted someone who could be kind of a foil for bringing out those questions of their larger life and experience, whether that have to be related to sexuality or to the kind of larger field of experience of what it means to be an artist in a very simple way. And I kind of felt that Ellen was perfect for that because of her tenacity, and also because she was really responsible for bringing a lot of the European avant-garde to New York and introducing them. So I
and
thought
her commitment kind of to outsider voices.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And she was African American, and she's
Yep.
woman. So I thought, okay,
Right. Yeah.
Ellen, she's a perfect person to bring into this kind of like nexus. But I think that like, I mean, I wanted this experience, which is like I spoke a bit about the craft thing, is that there's a kind of mourning, a kind of grieving that goes into this kind of Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, this kind of collective togetherness that we all do. Michael Jackson, oh my God, we all do. And none of that never happens for dance figures.
Right.
Like
David Bowie, just a few weeks
David
ago.
Bowie just happened.
Yeah.
Because they're just not on the radar.
Right.
And I want to see if I could introduce them, and if we could have this kind of this kind of mourning could come into the room and could progress into joy. I want to see if I could bring joy out of mourning by taking these very experimental artists and making their lives, you know, introducing their lives to a larger public.
And you end up,
a big task.
I mean, you said in an interview the other day that you don't have an obsession with pop culture. I only have an obsession with contemporary culture. When an interviewer asked you, Justin Jones, asked you, you know, about how much pop culture is integrated into your work. Could you explain that? I mean, so here you've got Bagway and Hijikata and Ellen Stewart, and you use a lot of pop forms in the telling, maybe, of their spirits.
Well, this was very important because I think that they're very kind of, I felt that they were very kind of locked in these kind of niche milieus.
Right.
People knowing them. How many people know about Butoh, let alone know Hijikata? How many people know? I mean, so few people know about Dominique Bagway. You know. So I felt that in this piece in particular, I really wanted to, as I say, introduce these experimental artists to a larger public. And I felt that the way to do that, and by larger public, I meant a mainstream audience. People who don't even necessarily know anything about dance or theater, but who are out for an evening. And this was a particular project for me because I had done this kind of enlarging the audience with the 20 Looks series, but I hadn't gone that big yet. I hadn't tried. There was still always this alterity. So I was trying to somehow to see, because I think the mainstream is kind of the radical space right now. You know, it's being, I mean, hipsterdom is almost mainstream right now, you know. So I think it's very interesting to go into the kind of, if you can have a kind of mainstream discourse.
So things have flipped on their heads, that a game show might be the avant-garde of today in a certain in the performance and dance world and things.
So I felt that in order to do that, in order to bring this kind of experimental people, I had to put them beside things that people know. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like things that are very recognizable to them, so that there's this kind of horizontality that Tatsumi Hijikata is alongside Adidas, which is alongside Christian Dior, which is alongside a famous actress, which is alongside Dominique Bagway, which is alongside Cannes Film Festival, like, so that they're not strangers, they're things that are existing in this horizontality of experience that we have in the world. So that was a particular strategy. So for me, again, it wasn't, I didn't see it as poppy. I don't use this idea. So I saw it as more like what's in the world today. You know what I mean? And I put these things on the world today. And when we're in the studio, we're very much using the things that are here with us. So I knew it was very important to do that, to bring a certain people in. I wasn't aware that, because so many people do hold on to this difference between pop and high, that would be a tension for some people.
More so in Europe and France than in the States?
More so. I mean, it's also the old country. I think, more so.
What was the hardest part of making the piece, would you say? And what gave you the most joy as well?
The hardest part was really doing something that I felt like honored those two artists and living with their ghosts. Because for me, of course, we can say the ghost of Montpellier is Dominique Bagway, but this is one level, and then you have to go deeper. But they're both really ghosts for me, and I feel like I really lived with them for a long time, and I really, there's a lot of, I really did not feel the need to make, I feel that they made such experimental work, and I've made such experimental work and avant-garde work. I didn't feel that I wanted to make that kind of piece for them. And I really want to make something that they would not have done, but that would honor them in this moment in time and get people to understand, to know them. Because the object for me was not to represent their work, but for people to go home and go, on Wikipedia, who is Dominique Bagué? Who was Hiji Kata? And to go in and do their own research and figure out how that connects to them. So that was really hard to not go into the homage, to not go into what was comfortable for me, to not to go into obscurity, and to really kind of hold myself. And I think the greatest pleasure, the greatest thing was, you know, you were there that second night in Montpellier when people started clapping, come, in this way that was like about joy and about, and I thought, okay, because the piece is, it's really, I mean, it has dark elements, and I knew that that's what I want. I couldn't deny that element, this element of death. Of course, it's in Buteau, but it's in these dead figures. But how to bring joy out of that, and knowing that I could do that was pretty.
And you found a way to flip that. I mean, to kind of like transition people, the piece from darkness to joy.
This is the art. I don't, you know, I mean, it's temporary. You're tinkering with it every day.
Yeah.
But then those people sit in front of it, and you have no idea how it's gonna bake.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's in the oven. You don't know what the heat, you know what I mean? There's so much of it you cannot control, you know?
Right.
And so when that finally happens and you kind of renew that thing and you realize, oh, this actually works in the way that I wanted it to work for people and to give people, it's quite satisfying. I mean, that's the kind of, and I say that because that's the kind of craft thing. That's not, that may have nothing to do with the audience. That's just like knowing that, oh, I have this sense of craft now. I can build on this. You know, I didn't have this before. You know, I didn't know how to do this before.
You know, earlier on in our conversation, I mean, hearing you talk about it and being there the second night in Montpellier, it was super exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this community connects with
me. I mean, I'm super excited because I think an American artist is very specific. And, But I think since we mentioned that, I think we shouldn't leave that. I want to leave that open. That one of the things that happened there was a first night.
Yes.
And
which I missed but heard about.
Yeah, a lot of people heard about it. Which, you know, it was the first night. It was the first time performing the piece in front of people. We're in the 600-seat theater, the Gore, which Bagué created this theater, and it was a premiere. You know, it was a good show. I thought it was a good show. There were some people who laughed. It was too long. It was, you know, there were things, we were nervous, there were things, but it was a good show. But of course, there was a lot of expectations for this thing, the Bagué, the whole show, you know, his theater, you know, in Montpellier and la 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 la. And of course, the theater was full of programmers. Like, because it's Montpellier Dance, and this is not the best conditions. But anyway, that said, I think some people, let's say, some programs didn't like the show. Let's say, I thought the show was a good show, but I want to keep working on the show. And so the second night, regardless of what anyone said, I just kept working, and I cut 20 minutes of the show because I felt that it was just a timing thing, that something needed to be moved, and I moved a few things around, and then that night it was successful, and everybody, you know, and it's interesting. So
you felt like you made the right, even you had less than 24 hours, you made the right choices, and you tightened in ways you thought served the work. And,
and I felt that ultimately, like, what I learned from that experience was that, and I will never do again, and I was in a certain situation, and I really respect and thank you to the people at Montpellier Dance who supported that project over 3 years, because it was a very long project, but we needed to do, I mean, my work, talking about my work, because this togetherness thing we're after, and just I was telling you about the other piece, Con Amour, the audience. The audience is 50% of my work. So if we don't practice in front of the audience, it's like we didn't. It's like we did the drawing, but there's no paint yet. It's like we did the, you know, we outlined the thing, but we didn't paint it yet.
So you don't really know the effectiveness of the full realization until you have a house of people.
And we usually do a lot of work in progress performances. But with this project, because there was a sense of wanting to keep it kind of closed, we didn't do that. We only did one kind of work in progress performance, and we did not do the whole show. So I think that was, I think that that was a completely, like I said, it was an experience to do that, and I understand why we needed to do that at that time, but I don't think that my work can really flourish under those conditions. And as soon as we're in a room with all the people and had a full performance, I could see what needed to happen.
Yeah,
but I couldn't, there's no way, because it has everything to do with this feeling that's happening between us and how we're riding that. And that's something I have to feel in the room with people and experiment. And we had never done that. So once I seen it, it was easy. This needs to go and that needs to go and that needs to go. Boom.
Yeah.
You know.
Have you continued to do that as the work has had other iterations? And,
a little bit. We've had a little bit too, but nothing like that, of course.
Right.
I mean, that said, I always keep working on the work because that's the way it stays alive. I don't want it to ever become dead.
Set. And
and we keep little things, always. With all the pieces, I keep working on them. I mean, I don't know that.
Well, I feel like we could talk all night. I have one last question that I was curious about. Earlier
you should try that once.
I'll do that with you. Oh, that would be great.
I would do that. That would be a great archive to talk.
I only got to 3 of my questions.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm very
No, it's good. It's fantastic.
No, but I'm very good. But just to say, because I think it's important, because we're in the moment. You're filming. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm super excited because really, part of why I want to make this piece was for American audiences, and because, as you know, I work a lot internationally now, and to deal with this history and to really bring it home. There, you know, regardless of where I work, I will. This will always be my home in a certain type of way.
Yeah, because you're really living. I mean, you're living everywhere these days, and you travel so much globally. I am curious if how that's affecting your world, your view of your work and things. But you really still feel like America will always still be your home and a place that you want your work to come back to.
Oh yeah. I mean, this has been specific for me. I mean, I know friends who've gone to Europe or go to other places and they don't build a place here. But for me, maybe it's because I was an American Studies major, I don't know. But I think that my work, always I want it to have an audience here. And I feel that it's very important that I dig that space out. And so that's why I'm so excited, because I'm excited to see how people, and the Americans, and there are some Americans who've seen it abroad, so I have a little sense, but there's nothing like this premiere that's going to happen, you know.
I'm curious, one last question. When earlier on in our conversation, you talked about the importance as you get older to look at what's going on, the content, what you want to say with your work and things. And 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we opened an international art show called How Latitudes Become Forms. And Ralph Lemon did a opening night performance with J.J. Gervais in which he took Bruce Naumann's floor wall positions and recreated it on 2 black bodies, and one artist from Africa, one from his work, America. And the reason he wanted to do that was because he thought he was making something of a point that Naumann in '65 didn't have, or had that luxury as a white artist, to make very formalist work in the height of the Civil War activism moment. And Ralph was interested in examining that, and then now remaking that through a different body, a different lens. In this moment in time in American culture, with what's going on with racial tension, Black Lives Matter, what the country seems to be absolutely dealing with, re-dealing with, does it affect your thinking about the work you make as an artist in dealing with the tensions that exist in that realm culturally?
Well, Philip, it's very funny because someone said, I was thinking about this the other day, because one thing that happened to me really changed my life. I did a piece in San Francisco. Early on, I was very young artist. I just started in San Francisco, and this guy came up to me after the thing, and he said, "Oh my God, I loved your work. I love the way you talked about the black man's anger and it's just so amazing the way you did that." And I was like,
Was this a white guy? Or
yeah, he was white, but I was shocked because I was not dealing with race whatsoever, anger whatsoever.
Right.
And someone said to me the other day, many times they interview me, and they say, "Well, what do you think about black queer performance?"
Right. Yeah.
And I said, "I like it, like that,
Yeah,
because
right,
I don't
right.
know.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
but my point is that whenever I make a work and I come on stage, that shit is there.
Right, right,
I don't have to do anything.
right. Yeah,
It's done.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
right.
That's what I've been born into, and I don't have to do very much. And I think that my being and doing is in the places and the spaces and the things that I'm going into is breaking down things by the very fact that I'm in the room.
Right.
And I'm still the only one in the room a lot of times.
Right.
And I think that for sure, you know, I'm very well aware that internationally speaking, I don't think that in terms of independent artists, no, there've been very few Americans who've had the kind of widespread
much
experience
support and
that I have.
Yeah, right.
And so, let alone being African American, being queer, so I take that all very with honor. But at the same time, I know that I don't have to do anything but be me, and it will be operative. You know what I mean? And stay really in my heart.
Right.
You know what I mean? And in my feeling for all, deep in my feelings, because that's something we didn't talk about. Is that besides this cerebral part and this entertainment part, is I think the real thing that why my work became important is this emotion that I bring to the work, and that kind of emotion was very strong. You know, so. I wear it lightly, but I know that it's so in me, like from that experience in San Francisco. That man taught me something so important. I thank him because I realized that, and I think, you know, so I don't think my work, you know, I think all those things, Black Lives Matters, and my work also has a lot of things to do with feminism and all those things. So I don't make pieces about that. It's like this piece is not about that, but of course, it's there. I mean, the fact that I'm alive, the fact that, you know, I travel through borders, I'm able to move, and it's not easy. You know what I mean? All those things are part of how important it is that I feel that I keep doing my work, you know, and creating a space for difference and a space for diversity and a space for questions and a space where the kind of assumptions around are kind of, how can I say, I think it's very easy as artists and as people moving in artistic communities to have a certain kind of political de facto kind of reactions and answers. But I think that as artists, I keep trying to not be de facto and to try to see things from so many different points of view that aren't mine, you know, and I think that that's a lot of what it's about for me, about going into different cultures and going into different places and being able to experience and perform in different countries and different places, because we all know it's easier for things to move than people. And so I think that it's very important that performers continually be able to we show things from different cultures and different places, because those meetings with people are very important. It's easy to, I mean, not always. We know it's not always to meet the consumer goods, but it's more easy than it is for people to move sometimes.
Well, Trajal, it's been such a pleasure talking.
It's great talking to you. I want to do the long night. I'm really into it. I think we should try to do this.
The 12-hour marathon.
You can't do it with someone else. Or you can do it with someone else, but you have to do it with me too. I think that would be very interesting. I would love to talk to you.
We'll have to ask these guys if they're up for a 12-hour video.
Are you up for that? I can tell they are.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to 2 nights from now when we get the U.S. premiere of The Ghost of Montpellier.
You know, there's nothing like that. You know, it's rare that, You know, I think about, when you perform so much, I keep trying to, how do you keep renewing that and that importance?
Right.
And you can't all the time. It's just sometimes you can't. But that doesn't matter to everyone, because you can still give a great performance and you don't have to renew yourself. But there are those moments when you recognize that, I'm coming into a moment that's very important to me and I want to take notes.
Right.
And this is one of them.
Oh,
this is really one of them. I'm super excited about it,
Good. Me too.
Very
Well,
excited.
thank you again, Trajal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.